Welcome back. It's been a while since I recorded the last video because during the summer there's usually a break in all the leagues and I don't play much chess otherwise. Today I would like to talk to you about the game which I played against the Belgian Fide master Quang, and this was part of the first match in the Belgian League between my team of Eupen against the team of Charleroi. So we won the match quite comfortably, and I want to show you my game against Quang. So I started, as most of the time, with the move knight to f3, to which he replied f5. And I was not really expecting to play against him, so I now improvised and I played some old line that I played before with the move d3. Of course, the move d4 leads to like mainline Dutch territory, but d3 is a sneaky little move. The main idea of d3 is that it's not so easy for black to play knight f6 because then white has a strong gambit with the move e4, and if black were to take bishop d3, now after let's say knight f6 I can go knight g5 and threaten to take on h7 with queen h5 checkmate following. So for that reason knight f6 is and grabbing the pawn is not really feasible. And so black basically has the option to play something like d6 or knight f6 and not take the pawn, or to do what my opponent did in this game, which is a little bit more modern, I would say, although there are also plenty of games with d6 here. So my opponent went for the move knight to c6, and the idea of knight to c6 is to answer the move e4 now with e5 gambiting a pawn himself. This is definitely also playable. For instance, after d4 we get a transposition to the Vienna with the colors exchanged, but that's not what I had in mind. So what I wanted to do is to play the move d4. And it looks of course very strange to play d3 first and one move later d4. You might think that I'm a complete putzer now, but it has some point actually. So the point is I do not want to allow him to go e5. And in normal Dutch lines that he would play, for instance, like the Stonewall, you want to have the knight on b8 rather than having it on c6. So having the knight on c6 is not necessarily good for black in the structures after white played d4. So for that reason, I kind of lost the tempo, but on the other hand, this knight is slightly misplaced for the structures that arise now. Well, he went for the move e6. Preventing d5, and I now went for a fianchetto structure with g3 and bishop g2. And I think this is the first point at which black has the choice what to do, and black could settle for a setup with d6 and then maybe even bishop e7 and castles, and then play a bit more of a standard Dutch. And in these positions maybe the knight on c6 makes slightly more sense. So I think that's probably what he should have done here. Instead, my opponent after bishop g2 now went for the move d5. And d5 goes into a type of a Stonewall structure, but normally in the Stonewall you have a pawn on c6, and now here this knight is actually pretty bad because it prevents black from playing c6. So for that reason I was kind of happy strategically that he went for that option. I castled. And I think also here probably if he wants to go for a Stonewall he should probably go bishop d6 and maybe at some point redeploy the knight and then go for c6. In any case, he played another slight inaccuracy with the move bishop to e7. And now I think after c4, I'm probably already somewhat better here. He went for castles, and now I thought for some time, and I realized if I go for something like knight c3, maybe he's actually going to take here and play the pawn grabber, and it's not so easy to get this pawn back. Yeah? I calculated some line like queen a4, and maybe he takes on d4. And after takes, I probably have a lot of compensation with moves like rook d1 and bishop e3 coming. But I thought it's not really necessary to sack a pawn at this point. Instead, I went for the move c takes d. Normally you don't play this move in these structures when black has already played c6. It's a little bit too early, but here I had the feeling the knight is really misplaced in all of the positions that arise. I was expecting the move e takes d5, which I would also consider to be the most natural reply. But also there, I feel that I'm already quite a bit better because c7 is weak, and this knight is really in the way. Yeah, so if instead black had the knight on b8 and the pawn on c6, black would be fine. But here I feel that this knight is really misplaced. All right, so after c takes d, he took black with a knight, which looks pretty risky to me, because now he opens up the position, and at the same time this bishop is completely locked in. I just continued the development with knight c3, and he makes another move with bishop f6, which does not really develop a new piece. Yeah? So in that sense, I'm now quite far ahead in development, and he played this committal move f5. Now, I saw that he runs a little bit out of moves. So what I did now is I played the move queen to b3, allowing him to potentially take the pawn on d4. I had not really calculated taking on d4 too deeply. So I thought I have several options here. One option could be to just take on d5, takes, and queen d4. And now, I mean, I can go bishop f4 or bishop e3, I don't know. And in any case, I mean, rook d1, rook c1 is coming, and this bishop on c8 looks pretty stupid. And I'm just one pawn down in this position. So it's not like I'm massively material down and I have a huge development advantage. Plus f5 is quite weakening. So I had the feeling this should be good for me. I also had the feeling if he takes on d4, even if I just go rook d1, the position is very, very unpleasant for him to play. Still, I was sort of expecting him to go and grab the pawn, because otherwise the position is just bad, but he's not even a pawn up. So instead he now went for knight a5, kicking my queen away, but now I can put the queen on c2, and he just went back to c6. Now probably hoping to repeat moves, but obviously white is already clearly better here, and I just went for rook to d1, now protecting the pawn on d4, and he still cannot really move. So it's still very, very difficult to develop the pieces. And yeah, the position is also horribly difficult for him to play, because there are no natural moves here. He went for the move king to h8, going out of this diagonal in some lines. And I answered this with, I think, a pretty strong move, the move h4. On the one hand, I create a luft for the king, and on the other hand, I also maybe go for knight g5 in some lines, as we will see later. Because actually my idea with h4 was to prepare e4 no matter what he does. He played another useful waiting move with the move a5, which might later on lead to knight b4, and then after queen b3 or something, the knight is already protected. And now I went for the aforementioned move e4. And yeah, just kicked the knight away, and he could now decide whether he wants to take on e4 or whether he wants to take on c3. And in any case, he's clearly worse. I was still somewhat expecting him to take on e4. And then maybe to go for something like h6 here, because, I mean, he can't probably not allow me to go knight g5 with a mating attack, so probably go with something like h6. But I can take this bishop at any point if I want, or I can just also continue development. And I'm just much better developed, so even something like bishop e3 and followed by rook c1 looks quite good for white. Still, I thought this is probably a better option for him than also now improving my pawn structure with knight c3, bc3. Because now, in addition to the advantages I already have, I also have the better pawn structure. He took, and now I went for the move knight to g5. I could also just take back on e4, it probably doesn't change that much. Yeah, I threatened to go queen e4 with potentially lethal attack on h7, and he decided to just take straight away. I took back, and he played queen to e8. And here again, I have a very, very pleasant choice between two moves. Bishop takes e4, which would give me pretty strong attack on h7. And he never really wants to go h6 because of bishop g6. But I was not entirely sure what happens after queen h5. I mean, the position should also be very good for white, but it was not entirely clear to me. For that reason, I just took back with the queen. And he's still pretty locked. So he cannot really go e5 due to d5. And so yeah, he basically has almost no moves. He just went for the very passive bishop to d7, at least developing a piece. But now also b7 gets weaker than it was before. And I replied with a move rook to e1. So one important detail here is that I did not want to play rook to b1 because there I was always slightly afraid that he might have some e5 break, potentially threatening bishop f5. So I did not want to do that. So instead I just went for rook e1, preventing e5 for the foreseeable future. And he chose to attack my pawn on f2. Yeah, and here I told myself, well, do I want to keep queens on the board, or is it also okay if I just exchange the queens? And I thought my positional advantage is so big here that even after exchanging the queens, the position should be completely busted. So that's why I went for queen f4, which I think is also a fine move. Yeah, he cannot really avoid the exchange of queens because I also threatened to take on c7. So he took basically the most or the best version of exchanging queens by playing h6, forcing me to exchange myself. And now, of course, I went for the move bishop to f4, hitting this pawn on c7. He tried to complicate matters a little bit. I mean, these two pawns are horribly weak. I can attack them like this. And also this pawn is, of course, very weak. So I think the position is lost anyway, so he decided to go for complications with rook a f8. And now rook a b1, just attacking the pawn on b7, is quite strong. He played b6 to protect it, but now I can just take on c7 and convert my advantage in this way. He took on f2. Yeah, and now the computer gives computerish win with bishop to d6 and bishop to e4, forming a mating net and then winning like this. But I think that's not necessarily the most human way of winning it, which is I think what I did here, just going for rook f1. Because the point is, if he takes all rooks, the endgame is just completely lost. And if he takes just one rook, then I just win the b6 pawn. Yeah, so here he has the choice to take on f1 or to go rook c8, which I think was a little bit more tenacious. But after takes and bishop c5, I also think that it's clear that white is completely winning here. Yet after takes, he now just loses the pawn because after b5 I can take it with the other bishop. So yeah, the rest is a matter of technique, as they say. Played king f2 to protect here and to bring my king to the center. And whenever he goes knight e5, what he now did immediately in the game, I have bishop a5 and this nice construction with two pieces between the bishop and the knight, which makes the knight look pretty stupid because all of these squares of the knight are covered by my bishop. And yeah, so he went for king to g8. Now I prophylactically first played c4 and now prophylactically played bishop to g2, covering the e4 square, such that he also doesn't get any counter attack there. And still his bishop is, of course, weak. I have the pair of bishops and I'm a pawn up, so the position is completely winning. He played a few more moves, king f7, I played a3 to fix this pawn on a4. And now I just gave a check. If he goes to d8, I have bishop f8, so he went to e8. Now the king is also passive. I played bishop to b7, and yeah, he went for g5. I just took twice. And here I played the move king to e2. I think maybe his point here was if I go for something like bishop a5 with the idea of pushing c5, c6, c7, c8 immediately, maybe he can try to go for something like e5 here. With the idea that if I take, then he has this knight g4 check. I think it should still be completely winning. I mean, even if I just go king e3, it should be completely winning, but I didn't want to calculate anything of this type and just played king to e2, now preparing such a maneuver. And since this is not really possible to parry this, my opponent resigned. Well, I think this was a pretty decent game by me. I think, of course, my opponent didn't play particularly well in the opening. But still, afterwards, I felt like also the conversion was fine. This h4 move was nice. And also the idea of exchanging queens. So if you have the pair of bishops and the space advantage, you should not be afraid of exchanging queens because the advantage is not suddenly going to go away after queens are off the board. So I could even trade down basically all rooks and queens and still had this decisive push with these super strong 2 bishops. So kind of a classical type of game with having 2 bishops. Well, yeah, that's it from my part today, and I hope to play more chess soon. See you in the next video.